The fall of the Corinthos fortress, a general hospital saga of fire, fury, and fracture ***. Port Charles had seen its share of bloodshed, betrayal, and secrets rising from the depths, but never had the town been so shaken as when fire engulfed the Corinthos estate, both literally and symbolically. In a blaze orchestrated not by fate but by revenge, Gen Sidwell unleashed a calculated military-style ambush on Sonny, determined to dismantle the empire brick by brick. What began as a tactical strike quickly descended into a war zone, shattering long-standing alliances and leaving emotional wreckage far more enduring than scorched timber. It started in the hush of early dawn when Sidwell, whose criminal reach had long threatened to rival Sonny's own, finally showed his hand. After months of shadowy whispers, silent surveillance, and cold strategy, Sidwell executed a bold assault on the Corinthos stronghold. But this wasn't a petty ambush. It was a declaration of war. Armed men wearing unmarked uniforms stormed the perimeter of Sonny's estate with merciless precision. They came not to negotiate but to destroy, and they did so with terrifying clarity. Caught in the crossfire was Carly, whose fierce loyalty to Sonny had placed her in harm's way more times than anyone could count. But this time was different. The attack was not just a warning, it was an annihilation. Flames tore through the mansion as bullets ricocheted across the marble floors. Explosions rocked the foundation. Sonny, surrounded by a small inner circle of loyal guards, returned fire with lethal determination, but even he had to reckon with the truth. Sidwell's forces were better equipped, better organized, and utterly without mercy. In the chaos, Carly was struck by debris as a window exploded near her. Her screams were lost in the roar of the inferno as Sonny dragged her limp body to safety, his face twisted with equal parts rage and helplessness. Outside the burning wreckage, paramedics fought to stabilize Carly, her body battered but still breathing. Her survival became a temporary balm for Sonny's soul, but it wasn't enough. Nothing could prepare him for what came next, the fury of his own daughter. Jocelyn stormed into the emergency shelter where Sonny and the remaining Corinthos crew had regrouped. Her face, usually composed and thoughtful, was ablaze with fury. The events of the night had reduced her childhood home to ash and nearly taken her mother's life. But even more unforgivable in her eyes was the legacy of danger that Sonny had allowed to thrive, a legacy she could no longer ignore. For years, Jocelyn had turned a blind eye to the violence that followed Sonny like a shadow. She justified it, rationalized it, buried her misgivings beneath love for her extended family. But as she watched her mother's blood being wiped off an ambulance gurney, something inside her broke. The man who had once been her protector had now become the very reason she had to live in fear. Her confrontation with Sonny wasn't quiet or diplomatic. It was raw. She accused him of bringing ruin to every life he touched, of choosing power over people, of dragging their family into a hell they hadn't asked for. Sonny, exhausted and bloodied, stood there silently, absorbing each word like a fresh wound. His eyes revealed a painful truth: he had no defense left. Every choice he'd made in the name of protection had instead turned his world into a battlefield. Meanwhile, Sidwell's attack sent shockwaves through Port Charles. Allies of Sonny began to fracture. Some feared retribution and distanced themselves. Others questioned Sonny's ability to lead, speculating that his empire, long considered impenetrable, was collapsing from within. Ava, ever the opportunist, quickly repositioned herself among those sympathetic to Sidwell's cause. Dante, torn between his badge and his bloodline, began quietly investigating both sides, seeking answers that could spare the city from full-on civil war. Back at General Hospital, Carly's injuries sparked a new level of urgency. Though stable, her condition remained fragile. The trauma wasn't just physical, it reopened old wounds, forced her to re-examine every decision that tied her to Sonny. In moments of lucidity, she questioned whether love had been worth this level of destruction. While Sonny sat vigil by her side, his mind cycled through memories of their past, the weddings, the reconciliations, the betrayals. And he realized just how much he'd sacrificed to keep control over a kingdom built on violence. Jocelyn, meanwhile, took her mother's pain as fuel for a dangerous shift in allegiance. Once Sonny's staunchest defender, she began meeting in secret with Dex and Anna, floating ideas about exposing the deep corruption that had allowed her family's suffering to persist for decades. Her transformation from grieving daughter to moral crusader startled even her closest friends. But she saw no other way. To her, Sonny was no longer a misunderstood anti-hero, he was a ticking time bomb, and she wasn't going to let him detonate again. Sidwell, watching the fractures spread through the Corinthos family, doubled down. He released a statement through underground channels claiming responsibility for the fire, mocking Sonny's paper throne and promising that this was only the beginning. His audacity sent a chilling message to other power players. The era of Sonny Corinthos was ending, and a new order was rising. Still, Sonny wasn't a man to surrender. Though physically worn and emotionally gutted, he began reconstructing his defenses from the ground up. He reached out to old contacts, men and women he hadn't called in years. He tapped into favors owed, secrets buried. The fire may have destroyed his house, but it hadn't destroyed his will. Yet even as he tried to rebuild, he couldn't escape the growing realization that his world had changed. The rules he'd once lived by no longer applied. And perhaps worst of all, the people he loved most were beginning to see him as part of the problem, not the solution. As Port Charles braced for what might come next, Jocelyn prepared to speak publicly, on social media, in interviews, at vigils. Her platform was growing, and she intended to use it to expose not just Sidwell's brutality, but Sonny's complicity in a system of power and violence that had ruined lives under the guise of protection. She wasn't just angry, she was determined. Meanwhile, Carly, gradually regaining her strength, found herself caught between the two people she loved most. She understood Jocelyn's pain, even agreed with much of it. But she also knew Sonny's heart, and the battles he fought. Sometimes with blood, often with guilt. She feared that if Jocelyn turned completely against him, Sonny might lose what little tether to goodness he had left. The scorched mansion would eventually be rebuilt, perhaps grander than before. But the trust that once tied the Corinthos family together would not return so easily. Fire had exposed not just the vulnerability of bricks and mortar, but the fragile morality of those who believed they were untouchable. In the aftermath, alliances would shift. Dante would have to choose whether to protect his father or uphold the law. Ava would leverage chaos to rise once again. Carly would weigh love against survival. And Jocelyn, now a symbol of resistance, would challenge the narrative that had defined her childhood. Sidwell's war wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. But it had already succeeded in doing what no rival ever could, breaking Sonny's family from within. As the ashes cooled and new battle lines were drawn, Port Charles stood at the edge of an era's collapse. And in the heart of the wreckage, the one truth no one could ignore remained: Sonny Corinthos, the man who had once ruled with unwavering certainty, now faced his most dangerous enemy, not Sidwell, not the fire, but the loss of the very people he fought so hard to protect.